And welcome to a rather worrying edition of the Oddity Archive. Contrary to the subject matter's mascot's prevailing attitude. But anyway, yeah, as strongly hinted at, today we're going to be taking a look at the, at this point, rotting corpse of Mad Magazine. But specifically, their shockingly frequent attempts at venturing into other forms of media outside of, just the regular magazine. And generally not too terribly successful forays at that. But anyway, we've got a fair amount to cover here today, so let's get right down to business. And before you ask, no, I am not going to cover Mad TV in this episode. At least, not the one that you're probably thinking of. Let's start with my personal favorite Mad side hustle. For longtime Mad readers, it's pretty well known that Mad would periodically take stabs at music. Sometimes just as printed lyrics on a page, usually a parody, but more famously as the occasional recording. The first one appeared in 1959, a single released on ABC Paramount Records, allegedly partially sung by Alfred E. Newman himself. And you know what? In its own naive, late 50s novelty way, I think it's absolutely charming. Did I mention this usually fetches in the triple figures on the collector's market?
90 miles an hour and it shimmies and shakes. Look out, man!
He's got no brakes!
What? We worry, I don't even care. What? We worrying can't get you anywhere.
It's not music, but it merits mentioning it here. For the life of me, I couldn't tell you if this predates the Alfred E. Newman single, but the second The Worst from Mad issue from 1959 contains a cardboard disc would-be introduction to the big players at Mad Magazine. It's half ultra-obvious and half nightmare-inducing.
The purpose of this recording is to introduce you to the staff of Mad Magazine, so you can hear how each of them sounds in real life. First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Albert B. Feldstein, and I am the editor of Mad. It's my job. And here's the publisher, William Gaines.
The first full album to bear the Mad name also dropped in 1959, Musically Mad by Bernie Green and the Stereo Mad Men. On a strictly artsy-fartsy level, it's appropriate that it has the Mad seal of approval. The album feels like one giant non sequitur. It's all instrumental, save for the odd-spoken bit, and is effectively somewhere halfway between PDQ Bach, had he debuted yet, and some kind of store-brand Spike Jones and his City Slickers. The liner notes, with a paragraph on each track, credited to then-editor Al Feldstein, are arguably funnier than anything on the record. In 1962 and 63, Mad put out a pair of full-blown albums on the Big Top label. at varying times home to Del Shannon and Johnny and the Hurricanes, and distributed a few of Phil Spector's early 60s hits. Anyway, funnily enough, the first album was not made expressly for Mad Magazine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This appears to be the work of an early comedy rock group called the Sweet Sick Teens, as opposed to Sweet 16, which, along with a separate singer named Mike Russo, had already put out a would-be dance craze tune called The Pretzel, in which you, shock of shocks, tie yourself into a figurative pretzel. The song went nowhere. But The Pretzel apparently caused the Sweet Sick Teens and Mike Russo to join forces and become the Delwoods. Together, they cut an album for RCA, including both sides of the existing Pretzel single, which wound up getting sold off to Big Top Records, whereupon the Mad Magazine crew bought the rights and slapped their name and Alfred E. Newman on the cover. This album was called Mad Twists Rock and Roll, because, the twist was a thing at the time. It's pretty basic late 50s, early 60s rock and roll, but it moves along nicely, and the humor is very on brand for Mad Magazine.
You can twist it, you can shake it, you can stop it, you can stroke, you can also break your leg. Bend your back and touch your toes. Just last Saturday, and was I embarrassed when she opened the door? 'Cause this is all I could say. A line date, I'll never go on one again, you can bet. Please don't think a guy is weak because he begs. But please, Betty Jane, the boys are all laughing. Oh, when you're gonna shave your legs. She got a nose job, she got a nose job. It's now turned up instead of hanging down. She got a nose job, she got a nose job, and now she's the prettiest gal in town.
In 1963, Mad Twists Rock and Roll was followed up by another Delwoods album, this time seemingly made with Mad Magazine in mind. This one was called Fink Along with Mad, a takeoff on Mitch Miller's Sing Along with Mitch. Of the two albums, both available on YouTube in their entirety as of this episode, this is the weaker one, even if it is home to Mad's best-known song and Alfred E. Newman's second and final time at the mic.
It's a gas!
To steer back towards the magazine for a moment, from the late 50s through the mid-90s, it was known to happen occasionally where you'd get a bonus disc with your usual rag. Starting with cardboard discs, like the old cereal box records, then on through to flexi discs, and ultimately winding up with CDs. I'm pretty sure my Mad Bites It hybrid AOL disc/audio CD was the last, appearing with issue number 350 in October of 1996, which contains 2 throwbacks and one horrid, then new rendition of an old track.
Was I embarrassed when she opened the door? And this is all I can say. Blind date, I'll never go on one again, you can bet. Blind date, I'd rather play Russian roulette.
In a roundabout way, Mad Bites It brings us back to the final Mad album, Mad Disco, a full-length album on flexi disc, a rarity for the format, which dropped in, appropriately enough, early 1980. Some of it works, some of it doesn't.
There's no words to follow, there's no words to follow, there's no words to follow in the song. So don't even try, don't even try, don't even try to sing along. Why you must be wondering, why you must be wondering, why you must be wondering why no words exist. Well, the truth is mad, the truth is mad, the truth is mad was just too cheap to hire a lyricist.
Okay, Alfred, let's boogie!
Great, big, beautiful, wonderful, incredible, super spectacular day.
Hell! Round 7 at night, you go out for a bite. The streets all aglow from a large UFO. A creature comes out with 2 heads in the snout. It croaks like a frog and throws up on your dog. It thinks you are great, it wants you for its mate. You're sealed in a case and go flying in space. And you silently say as the earth fades away that it's not such a super spectacular day.
The boy from Tacarembo, La Tumba del Fuego, Santa Malipa, Zacatecas.
In 1965, Mad apparently commissioned Mary Rogers, daughter of composer Richard Rogers, Rodgers and Hammerstein and Rodgers and Hart, to adapt a handful of articles from Mad Magazine into a stage musical. The result was The Mad Show, which debuted off-Broadway in January of 1966. Unfortunately, if anyone ever filmed a period performance to begin with, it's never surfaced. Having said that, Columbia Records, and specifically their Masterworks line, amusingly enough, did release a cast album a little later in the year. Having said that, the show apparently ran for about 2 years and has been revived, usually by schools, many times since. Though I kinda get the feeling that most of the people that have tried their hand at it in more recent years didn't really get it. As one would expect, there's no real plot to The Mad Show, just a series of vignettes, usually involving a song or two, and it's fitfully amusing. Among the specific targets are folk rock singer-songwriters, a la P.F. Sloan and Bob Dylan, and long-running kids' TV show franchise Romper Room. But all too often, it's just a series of generic gripes about modern life circa 1965. The Mad Show is noteworthy, however, for featuring 2 future TV stars, Joanne Worley, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and Linda Lavin, Alice herself. And speaking of Linda Lavin, her main piece in the show, namely a little thing called The Boy from... which is a loose parody of The Girl from Ipanema, has been covered by every wannabe Broadway starlet for the last half-century plus. I can't excerpt the real track, thanks to YouTube's bots, but Sony does have the entire cast album posted to YouTube as of this episode.
Tall and slender like an Apollo, he goes walking by, and I have to follow him. The boy from Tacarembo, La Tumba del Fuego, Santa Malipa, Zacatecas, La Junta del Sol y Cruz.
Regular programming will not be seen at this time, so we may bring you the Mad Magazine TV special. Regular programming will not be seen at this time, so we may bring you the Mad Magazine TV special.
Prior to Mad TV in the 90s, Mad Magazine did try its hand at 2 TV pilots. obviously neither of which were ever picked up. The big difference between these pilots and the later sketch comedy show was that they were intended to be issues of Mad Magazine come to life, fully animated. The first and most famous stab was made in 1973 with the intent of being aired on ABC in early 74. The story goes that ABC had initially agreed to air it as a standalone special with the option for a subsequent series, but backed out when it couldn't find a sponsor. According to longtime Mad writer Dick DeBartolo, the show was dropped because of the opening and fairly lengthy Automobile Manufacturer of the Year segment, which offended the car manufacturers that would have sponsored the show.
Magazine TV special is brought to you by
In my opinion, the short segments that punctuate the 1973-74 Mad special are good to great. The longer parodies, however, are turgid. Not to mention, everything seems to be just carried over from various regular issues of the magazine. Now, there are some anecdotes floating around online saying that the 1973/74 special did ultimately air as a syndicated one-off during the late 70s and or early 80s, but I have found absolutely zero corroborating evidence of this. Anyway, the legend goes that the special only survives today because one Mark Kausler, who did the Spy vs. Spy segment in the episode, had it written into his contract that he get a copy of the completed special as part of his payment. He was given a 16mm print. Since then, that print has been duped every way to Sunday on various videotape formats, but was finally given a proper 2K scan in 2022. A watermarked copy of the new scan is currently lurking on YouTube.
Just like you told me. Uh-huh. And I'm leaving the second Tuesday of the month between 3 and 4 p.m. on a day when there's a solar eclipse, just like you said.
Oh, this joker's gonna make us miss our plane.
Much more mysterious is the completely unaired Mad special from 1988. This one was put together by Hanna-Barbera. It was started in 1985, and that's pretty much all the info I've got. One segment of it, thanks to an ultra-doopy videotape copy, is floating around online. If that one segment is anything to go by, I'd say this was probably a mixed bag compared to the 70s special. While the animation was a step down, the content felt better paced to me. Of course, a complete copy would be helpful. A very blown out HBO promo bit, and I'm guessing by the graphics this is probably 81. I had already heard of this movie thanks to copious amounts of early 80s HBO footage in my collection, and had no idea it had any ties to Mad Magazine. That bodes well. The movie in question was Up the Academy, released in mid-1980. What we're dealing with here is effectively a mashup of National Lampoon's Animal House and Rock and Roll High School, just now taking place at a military school. Up the Academy was directed by Robert Downey Sr., best known for his underground counterculture classic Putney Swope from 1969. And given the relative similarity in tone, you'd think Downey would have been a good choice. And he might have been, but the script sucked, and Downey instead found himself frustrated with Warner Brothers and simply did whatever the studio wanted just to get the film finished. The movie itself is an uneasy mix of late 70s, early 80s lowbrow comedies and late 60s counterculture stuff, just a decade late. The plot revolves around a group of cadets taking revenge on their lunatic commanding officer, and that's about it. The humor always seems to go for the low-hanging fruit. The more artsy parts of the movie, like the intentionally glitchy editing, would have been right at home back in 1968. Really, only the all-rock soundtrack stands out, and even that's got a few real duds. There's kind of a reason why bands like Blow Up and Cheeks remain thoroughly obscure.
From the madman who started it all, Mad Magazine presents Up the Academy.
To get back to my opening statement about the movie, Mad Magazine lent its name to Up the Academy, but that was seemingly the extent of their involvement. When the movie was screened for Mad's staff, editor William M. Gaines was so appalled that he wound up paying Warner Brothers some $30,000 to remove all references to Mad from the film for TV and video. It was too late for theatrical prints. Leading man Ron Liebman was so turned off by the final product that he demanded his name be scrubbed from the film as well. To hammer the disapproval of the film home, Mad published a parody of Up the Academy titled Throw Up the Academy, in which the Mad writers voiced their dissatisfaction by giving up on their parody halfway through. In a cruel twist of fate, when Warner Brothers got final hold of Mad Magazine, thanks to some selling and reselling of the Mad name, plus some additional corporate consolidation, the film was restored to its initial state. The current DVD and streaming issues of the film are the original cut, complete with extra nightmarish Alfred E. Newman cameos.
The new Mad Magazine game from Parker Brothers. These people are doing some real goofy things.
Mad took 2 confirmed stabs at a home game. The first, and far and away best, was the Mad Magazine board game from 1979. It's basically Monopoly in reverse. Instead of the winner making the most money, the winner is whoever is first to lose all their money. Mad money, if you will. Loaded with weird, arbitrary directions, like always passing the dice to the player on your left, and asking the player to do things like impersonate a chicken or walk around the room backward while balancing one of the game cards on your head. It's the kind of game that's probably best served with alcoholic beverages.
I win! The new Mad Magazine game from Parker Brothers.
To wrap things up, let's take a quick, admittedly superficial look at Mad's forays into video games. Now, of course, Spy vs. Spy, the other official Mad game, has been getting various video game adaptations since 1984. Most variations of the Spy vs. Spy games are decent and challenging, and not funny at all. They'd probably have a much better reputation if they didn't have the Spy vs. Spy name and characters attached to them. A third Mad game may or may not be tied to Mad Magazine at all, but I'd like to think it is. Mad, the publication, isn't credited anywhere, and an Alfred E. Newman-esque character only appears briefly in the intro, but yeah, it's not quite Alfred E. Newman. Regardless, this game was known as Mad TV, 2 words, which was released in 1991 for MS-DOS, Atari ST, and the Amiga. And the whole thing apparently only got released over in Europe. The game revolves around you budgeting a TV station's broadcast schedule. You win if you stay under budget. The humor is incredibly sparse, or maybe just German. It seems to be German-made, and the whole thing feels like it's meant for an incredibly dumb college business course. Again, I'd like to think that Mad had some ties to this, if only because it's such a massive non sequitur. Oh, well, that's it for today's archive. Join me next time when I provide more snippy answers to simple questions.
There's a funny little fella who you all know. He can cheer you up when you're feeling low. With his funny little grin from ear to ear, he'll make your troubles disappear. What? Me worry, I don't even care. What? Me worry, worrying can't get you anywhere.
That's the way we get around. We never cross no